regular town council meeting. It is Tuesday, December the 5th at 3 p.m. Can we get a roll call, Eddie?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Reeves.
Here.
Councilmember Mikey Kent.
Here.
Councilmember Tripp.
Here.
Vice Mayor Knight.
Here.
Mayor Mueller.
Here. With that, can everyone, if you're able, please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. And next, if there are no changes, I would like to call for a motion and a second to adopt tonight's agenda, this afternoon's agenda.
Mayor, actually, I will wait. Consent calendar. I
I
apologize.
move approval of today's agenda.
I second.
We have a motion by Knight and second by Reeves. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, abstain? If not, that passes unanimously. Thank you. And next item, these are council member announcements. It's December. There's got to be, I will start. I know that something that's very close to my heart is Wreaths Across America. And there will be ceremonies on December the 16th. At 9 o'clock, we'll be placing wreaths on all the veterans' graves at the George Yount Pioneer Cemetery. And then at 11 o'clock, we will be placing the wreaths and having a ceremony up at the Veterans Home on that day. So please join us if you're able. It's, the cemeteries are beautiful. It's a very moving events, and it's just a great way for us to not honor their deaths, but really their lives and what they brought, so that we can all be safe and have liberty. So, thank you. That's my announcement. Seeing no other announcements, I am going to move on. This is also, I think, very exciting for the council. We have a paid proclamation paid holiday closure proclamation. And what I would like to do is first invite up our town manager and all of the directors to come up here while I read the proclamation. And then each one of us are going to be presenting one to the directors and our town manager, and we're going to take some photos. So I will start. This proclamation recognizes Yountville town employees through paid holiday closure in 2023. Whereas during the November 21st, 2023 Yountville Town Council meeting, the Town Council approved the closure of town offices to the public during the winter holiday break on December 27th, 28th, and 29th, 2023. And whereas the Town Council wishes to express gratitude and thanks for the town employees' hard work and dedication to the community throughout the year, and therefore would like to provide paid holiday closure days for benefited town employees scheduled to work during the winter holiday break as a holiday thank you to the staff. Now, therefore, let it be resolved that I, Margie Moeller, Mayor, on behalf of the Town Council and our community, express our sincere appreciation to town staff for their excellent work this year and their dedicated services to the residents of Yountville, and the town will close town offices during its winter holiday break on December 27th, 28th, and 29th, 2023, and the town will pay benefited employees scheduled to work on these days and benefited employees who must work during the holiday break, as determined by their department heads, will receive pay for the holiday closure date in addition to pay for any hours worked. The paid holiday closure days are not holidays, personal days, or vacation days, and do not vest with the employee receiving this benefit. And benefited employees scheduled to work during the town's winter holiday break shall use the paid holiday closure days only on December 27th, 28th, and 29th, 2023. Thank you all very much. Councilmember Reeves.
Well, I'm especially privileged to present this proclamation to John Ferns, our Director of Public Works. He epitomizes the type of dedication and heart that lives in our Yountville organization. He answered the call to serve as our interim town manager to support both the council and staff during the period of unknown that was our elected and staffing transitions. He is representative of our behind-the-scenes heroes in the Public Works Department. We depend on this department every day to make Yountville the best it can be, and even then they go above and beyond. It is in appreciation of his and their success that we offer these holiday thank yous for a year full of change, adaptation, and moving forward.
Well, I don't have a prepared speech like Councilmember Reeves has, but I also have the term heart when I think about the finance department. You guys are the unsung heroes, too, that the buck starts with you and the buck stops with you, and you keep it organized. And Celia, you also have shouldered double responsibility this year as you've assumed the role of HR and now are officially director. So you have the heart for the employees, too. And this award and proclamation wouldn't be valid unless I include your team, Kyle, Ashley, Vanita, and Kim in it, too, because I know that you all work together so well. So thank you very much and congratulations. Enjoy those days.
It's an honor for me to thank all the staff for your hard work for our community this year and for many years. But it's also a great privilege for me to have the honor to be able to present this proclamation to our Parks and Rec Director, Samantha Holland. I've always felt that it's the Parks and Rec Department that really, for most residents, is maybe the one and the only touch points where they really come to experience and be a part of the community. They enjoy our programs and our parks, and so it's with great gratitude that I want to thank you and for all your staff for what you do and what you provide to our community. We wouldn't be Yountville without Parks and Rec, and we have this program has grown immensely in the last 15 years or more that you've been with us. So thank you to your staff and for all that you do for our community.
And last but not least, I'd like to present.
Can you speak in your mic?
Sorry, Irene. I'm going to sit down and speak in my mic. Present this to Irene to thank her, as well as all the rest of the staff for really a job well done this year. Irene came to Yountville to take over a really important function for the town, which is the planning department, and I think it's a large part of what makes this such a beautiful town is all the thought and effort that's gone into planning, and it makes it a livable place. And you work, and I guess I can really appreciate this given some of my legal background, you work in a very complex regulatory environment and deal very closely with the public, and I've never heard anybody in Yountville who's gone through the planning process say anything but really good things. So I really want to thank you and your staff, Diane Levine and Kyle Johnson and Kendra Bruno, for all the good work you do. And then I just wanted to thank the rest of the staff as I finish my first year on the council. Working with all of you has been one of the bright spots, and I really have enjoyed it. And thank you for all your hard work this year.
Last but not least, Brad, thank you for joining Yountville and steering. It's not a big ship, it's a little ship, but it still needs to be steered. And thank you for moving here. We love that you chose to actually live in Yountville and, direct our wonderful staff and us. So I think we have all just really want to say thanks to everything that you're doing as well. So happy holidays, everybody. Now we can stand because we don't have to talk. You can. Thank you.
Number one. After the meeting. Yeah, thanks to the team for showing up.
Yeah, I wanted to get.
See these faces.
I'm going to sit. So I can,
Okay.
But I wanted to get over to my microphone to thank, first of all, the department heads, and thank you, all the employees, of course. But, you hear thank you a lot, right, from councils and, and from the community. But, when you make a gesture that includes things like paid time off, it's a different level of thank you. And so, we're all here because we are committed to the town and obviously the high standards that have been set, and they're all the reason that those standards are here. I'm the new kid in town, so I'm just trying to, I guess, observe, learn, but contribute. And I'm feeling like we're in a really good place, after 5 or 6 months, however long I've been here now. But clearly this is, your town, and I think gestures like this go a long way. So, and are uncommon from council. So I would just say out loud from the staff, thank you. They are here because I'm sure they all love their jobs in their own way, but this is part of the reason that they love their job is that they're being recognized by all of you. So, and the last thing I'll say, because 2023, as you pointed out, was a transitional year. I mean, both for the council and for the manager and some of the staff. And transitions are hard. Change is hard, and I think it's sometimes hard in a town like Yountville to say things are hard, because it feels a little, I don't know, just gloating or something. When I talk to some of the other managers in the valley, I do feel like, I came to the perfect place. And,
Good.
and my wife and I are very happy to be living here. And I think, I just want to recognize the challenges that change present and appreciate the staff for all the hard work and perseverance. So thank you, everyone.
Yay, the staff.
Now I would like to invite our town clerk, Eddie Gomez, to meet me at the podium. Eddie, we're going to miss you a lot, and we keep the baby pictures coming. This is a certificate of appreciation and recognition of Eddie Gomez, town clerk. The town council and staff express a sincere thank you for your contributions and services to the town of Yountville, first as management fellow, then as management analyst, and finally as town clerk from January 2018 to December 2023.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. It's been a pleasure to serve you, to the town, to the citizens of Yountville, working with this wonderful staff. Honestly, this is a golden place. It's hard to live. I will not miss the commute, hour and a half. And after listening about the 3 holidays, I'm thinking I might change my date. But I want to say just thank you. It's been a wonderful experience growing in this town. I've learned so much. I mean, going from school where you hear about government to actually practicing here, it's been incredible. So I will miss this place dearly. I'll try to calm down every now and then. But again, it's an hour commute, so don't expect to see me often. But thank you so much. And I'm available even after leaving. So.
And you know how to log into council meetings. If you
I do. I'll be watching, and I'll come for non-agenda public comment every so often. So.
So now is time for public comment on anything that is not on today's agenda. Do we have any public who would like to speak to us today? See nobody coming to the microphone. It's a good time to exit stage right if you're interested. Thank you, Jacob. Okay, now consent calendar. Today we have, let's see, 7 items on our consent calendar. Right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So with that, would anybody like to make a motion and a second
Sure.
to approve our consent calendar today? And
Mayor Muller?
we're going to vote.
Before the motion is taken, I just want to make, for the record, that the minutes, there was a small change to the minutes from November 7, 2023 regular meeting, item 8.6. Councilmember Reeves noticed that there was just a duplicate in one of the paragraphs, so no significant change at all. We just deleted the duplicate paragraph from the minutes.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and vote. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Oh, we need a motion. We need a motion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar. With just one comment, I just wanted to take an opportunity to say, without pulling any of these items, that our consent calendar just really shows how much work our staff in town does. And from the public works and the certification of the town's maintenance of effort and equivalent funds and the recycled water transmission main work that you do. We have staff that works on issues in this community day to day that we don't see, but improve our roads and our infrastructure, and also here thanking the recommendations from Samantha Holland, the Parks and Rec Director, about the Arts Fund fee contract and recommendations to review it further during our budget session. So thank you, and that's I move approval of the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. Now we can vote.
Mayor, the vote is not open. And it passed unanimously.
All right, thank you, everybody. Item number 9, we have 2 guest presentations. The first one is a presentation of the annual comprehensive financial report, and Director of Finance is here to get us going.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Town Council. It's once again that time of year when we present the annual comprehensive financial report for the prior fiscal year. Fiscal year 2022-2023 ended June 30th, 2023. And now that the annual audit has been completed, this report has been compiled and presents a snapshot of the town's financial status as of that date. Sheldon Chauvin of Chauvin & Associates, the town's external auditing firm, is here to go into a bit more detail about the ACFR, as we like to call it.
And I apologize for not getting your new title correct. I'll have to
okay.
work on that one. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you. How recent is the new title? I don't think I know.
Administrative Services Director.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Hard earned if you've read the ACRA, right? A lot going on there. This is the annual history lesson that we do. I am a history teacher today. June 30, 2023 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. I'm happy to be back to present once again. I think last year my leaving comment might have been, or maybe my opening comment might have been, that it was the first presentation I had done since COVID. And I had missed it so much. And I have to say, I still do, right? I've appreciated being out and about and getting out to see people. But today, I've had 3 meetings, and last night I had one long one, so I'm tired. All right, so it looks like I have control here, so I'm going to go ahead and see if this works the way that it used to. And the computer is over here? Okay. Let's try one more time. There we go. All right. I wanted to cover the audit process a little bit. I'm not going to go into too much detail, just a rather very high-level overview, and so you can see the phases involved and how long it actually takes maybe to get to this point. This process is very detailed, very extensive, Starts with the audit planning and preparation, which is known as Phase 1. That's where we document the internal controls and do some tested controls. Phase 2 is the audit execution, otherwise known as the year-end field work, testing substantive trial balance numbers, cash, investments, capital assets, long-term debt. The audit reporting, that's what we're doing now. Phase 4 is kind of new. Phase 4 is following up, right? So if there's anything that the council happens to see in the ACFR, or if there's questions that come from this meeting that lead to us having to look into something, or maybe even have to change something, then that's what we do in the follow-up phase. So overall process, seems like the audit's rather easy because I just explained it in about 60 seconds. Might be free in the future if it's 60 seconds. Nah, it won't be free. What do we do? Well, we have standards to follow, and we have responsibilities as auditors. So the first standards that we follow are the generally accepted auditing standards, of course. It's pretty much the standards that everybody in the United States follows. If you're a local government, you're going to follow generally accepted governmental auditing standards. What's the difference? Well, really it's the write-ups, it's the deliverables, it's the management letters, it's the findings, it's the question costs, which, by the way, you'll see later that the town of Yountville does not have any of those. So there's more in depth in relation to compliance, more in depth in relation to abuse as it relates to a local government. Our objective as an audit firm is to express an opinion on the financial statements. And when we do that, we're expressing an opinion as to whether or not the financial statements are free of material misstatement. All right, so I sound like a textbook, because that's exactly textbook. Free of material misstatement. So from there, we provide a reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement, not absolute. So you get a high level of confidence, but not 100%. And of course, because of Enron and WorldCom, the audit's risk-based. Anybody remember Enron and WorldCom? Yeah. Before that, you didn't have to test controls, didn't have to even barely document them. Just jump right into the cash. But then when you're preparing the financial statements and don't put those mitigating risk assessments in place to reduce your risk of not being independent, you end up having a risk-based audit. Materiality is a pretty broad concept in an audit. As an auditor, we are given the freedom to use our judgment to determine materiality based on a set of standards that we are given. The definition of materiality has changed over the years, but it's actually become more confusing because now you have the concept of significance included in something that was quantitative. We always considered the quality of the materiality levels we determined, but now we have to think about what the significance might be to the council or to the citizens. That's difficult because it's hard to know what everybody else is thinking, right? What they might be relying on. But we do our best to make sure we're following the standards. And at times, we will reduce materiality below what is normal if we find a risk that it has a need, an area that has a need for such a low-level materiality. For the town, actually for this last year, across the board for receivables and payables, we cut our materiality levels in half for all of our clients, just to kind of give it a fresh look at those areas because that's where we were finding some errors and some omissions and some mistakes. So there's a whole cutoff process there. And the town of Yountville's never had that issue, except for one super tiny immaterial one, but they picked it up this year, and that was with the street report. So good job on that. So it was about $6,000, less than that, and they picked it up, so they got it. Internal controls, I've discussed that a couple times already. It's an important part of the audit, documenting those internal controls required. Testing controls, not necessarily, unless you have a single audit, which is a different level of auditing. But we do test controls because we want to gain an understanding as best we can, and then we also want to be able to provide recommendations in those areas if we can. And the best way to do that is to at least get your hands on the source documents that relate to the control process. What kind of a document do you have in front of you? Well, the basic audit report required by governmental accounting standards has a management's discussion and analysis, the basic financial statements. The government-wide financial statements are included in the basic financial statements. The fund financial statements are also included in the basic financial statements. And then supporting the basic financial statements are the notes to the financial statements. Can that be any more confusing? So in essence, you have two sets of financial statements included in one audit report or one reporting package. We do not issue an opinion on the management's discussion and analysis. We do not issue an opinion on the introductory section. We do not issue an opinion on the some of the supplementary information, such as the statistical section, right? Although, and we can't really do it on the statistical data because it's so long, right? 10 years of data there. Although the numbers included in that a lot of those numbers are audited. They go through the audit process. Some of them don't. It just depends on what the data is. Management's discussion analysis does include audited data, but we just don't issue an opinion on that particular part of the document. Some information, quick summary, statement of net position. So this is your government-wide balance sheet. Keep in mind this has your capital assets, your long-term debt, your pensions, your other post-employment benefits, all rolled up in there with some new, well, not new anymore, but with some terminology that we all are starting to get used to. That's deferred outflows of resources and deferred inflows of resources. And ultimately, the idea here is to look at those governmental activities and those business type activities. So if you have water, sewer, those type of activities are business type versus your government activities where, they don't really fund themselves. You need property taxes, TOT, to come through and fund those activities. So your net position was 54.61. My contacts are working. Million at June 30, 2023, and that's versus 50.08 at 2022, so a slight increase there. And then your business type also went up 18.1 to 16.41. I'm not going to kill you with those numbers. I'm going to move on. Major funds. I really just wanted you to see that fund balance. So that ending fund balance there, a total of $29.91 million at June 30, 2023, and then the beginning balance there was 25.61. So again, old news. You're looking at 2 years worth of history here now. But you also want to see what those major funds are, because the governmental funds, we have certain funds that we classify as non-major, and that's also following standards. And so your general fund, your capital projects fund, your debt service fund, and your Measure T fund are considered major. Right? We highlight those funds. Capital assets. What do we do with those? Well, we depreciate them. Why? I don't know. It's fun. A lot of people don't like the concept of depreciation, but what it does is it lets you see how soon you might need to replace an asset, and that's the idea behind it, right? When are you going to need to fund some capital projects, right? So that's the point. It doesn't really work out that way all the time, but that's the point. And so here, what you can see is where your capital assets were as of June 30, 23 versus 22 for your different types of activities. And so just off the top, total capital assets were $47.85 million versus in June 30, 2023 versus $48.09 at June 30, 2022. So just looking at that very slight change in your capital assets, but there's a lot that goes on in those balances and the activity there throughout the year. We actually spend quite a bit of time testing capital outlay expenditures. Long-term debt, not important. We'll just skip it. We don't need that stuff. One thing I wanted to mention is that there was a new standard this year that did not have a super significant impact on the town. Subscription liabilities is a new liability that you did not have before. So that was a result of implementing Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 96. We're in the hundreds, by the way, now. And that statement required that you take a contract where you have a license fee subscription and record a right-of-use asset that's an intangible asset, and then also offset that with a liability. So we're tracking those assets and liabilities now in the government-wide financials, but not in the funds, right? Not in the fund statements, just the government-wide. And so now you see a new liability related to that. In the capital assets, you also would see a new asset related to that. Very similar to the leases that we implemented in 2022, right? Same concept, right? A use asset, lease liability. No more capital lease terminology, though. Now it's just lease liability. Net pension liability. Well, that pension liability kind of got ridiculous this year. You'll see that it started out the year July 1, 22, which is your June 30, 2022 balance at $1.7 million, bumped all the way up to $3.9 million. I was at a client last night doing the same presentation. Theirs went from $27 million to $62 million. Yeah. So keep in mind what happened in 2022 was an anomaly. Great earnings included in the measurement period flipped on its head for June 30, 2023, which is the measurement period of 22, which had bad earnings, especially for CalPERS. So that's why you're seeing this large increase, because if you don't have good earnings in the plan, the trust goes down, the assets go down, and the liabilities go up. Also, the discount rate was decreased, so that doesn't help. Long-term liabilities for business activities. So that was all just in the fund. So this is the same concept. The only thing that's really different here is, we allocate the liabilities for the OPEBs, for the OPEB compensated absences and the pension liability to business activities and the government activities, right? So you have different funds, different accounting. You have people working in all those areas. So you have to allocate those. So the one difference here is really just the state revolving loan. Audit results. So all that fun just to get to what I really do. I like talking about the numbers, though. See if everyone's paying attention sometimes. But you guys probably read through this act for page 1 to 300, right? I don't. All right. So we did not have any exceptions in the audit, as you can see. So that's excellent. So that means another pass on the audit. No modifications in the opinion letters. No material weaknesses were noted. That's huge. We did not have any disagreements with management. I don't like getting yelled at. I think I told you that before. No significant pass-on adjustments. So it's been something of an anomaly to not have pass-on adjustments. So congratulations on that, because we typically do have pass-on adjustments. And you get my stamp of approval. So there you go. I tried to make it fun. I think I made it funner last year, though. It's kind of a hard topic to make fun. But if you have questions or comments or anything else you want to discuss, I'd be more than happy to go ahead and go there.
All right, thank you very much for that. So first I'll see if any of the council has questions, and, either for Celia or our auditor. Councilmember Tripp.
Well, given your schedule, I'm sure you won't be disappointed that I don't ask a bunch of really hard questions. But what is a pass-on adjustment? Is that an adjustment that happens following the close of the year, or?
It's a small immaterial difference.
Okay.
So what we do is we actually, after we identify what is a significant material amount, we also identify those smaller amounts that could add up to be, right? And so in doing that, we might have amounts that were just trivial, and so we passed on those. So there's also things such as reconciling items that we don't include in that list.
Okay.
So it means that we reconciled something to a reasonable amount, so we didn't include it in the pass-on adjustment list because we didn't go any further with it. So that's really the concept.
And then more out of curiosity, but in terms of the audit process, how much time do you spend actually digging into files and looking at like invoices and payables and
Most of our time.
the vendors, whether they're for real? Okay, so that's
Yeah.
a significant part.
That's a significant, I'd say it's 20% of the audit.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're really in the actual paperwork, the
Yep,
transactions.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and the biggest, going through an audit process, you're always looking for constructive criticism, and you get both constructive and non-constructive criticism during an audit process. And the most criticism as a firm we've had this year is that our engagement organizer list, the list of items that we send to the client, is too damn long. So they want us to bring that list down and request less. But the problem that we're having is that the standards have changed so much that we are having to request these documents. And so there's really no way around it. And so a lot of that has to do with expenditures testing, disbursements testing. And if you're in the single audit, go ahead. You know what? Actually, I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask you, kind of following on that. So, for example, with the water enterprise, where it's kind of a business function, billing customers for water usage and whatnot.
Same concept.
And so you go through that. And do you look at things like how we manage, or how the town manages credit card information and things like that? For billing and that sort of thing?
So we don't do that side of it, because now you're getting into information technology audit, which is more of an operational IT audit. It's a different scope.
Okay.
However, if we find a risk in that area, a fraud risk, a cybersecurity risk, maybe, just by going through our normal risk assessment and audit process, then we may. But in this particular, nothing came to light that made us need to dig into that.
Yeah, and I was just asking a question. I have no
It's a great
reason
question,
to believe
actually. Yeah.
that we're not doing it just right. So
No,
thank you.
the security of customer information is huge in today's day.
Well, it
and age,
is in
so,
credit
yeah.
card management. And,
Absolutely. And we do, on the other side of things, the town's credit cards we test as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you do look at the water enterprise to
Absolutely.
the billing. Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no more questions, so do we need a motion to receive and file?
We do not, Mayor.
We do not. Okay, great.
All right.
Presentation. We don't really take public comment either. Okay, well, great. I don't see any other questions, so Thank you very much, and congratulations.
All right. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for the shortest audit presentation I've ever heard. So that, but I want to give special thanks to Celia and Kyle. I think it was soon after I got here when the finance department goes into audit mode. I feel like it's like a whole different tone. Like it's just like, hey, we're in the audit. Like, don't talk to us. And I recognize it's a lot of hard work, and I see you both working so hard together, and obviously the results speak for themselves. So thank you.
Yeah, you have a great team. And yeah, Kyle's got great questions coming. He can stop, though.
All right.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
you very much for coming. Have a good rest of your evening, now that we didn't take up too much of your time. All right. Now we are moving on to, we have a second presentation by Shane Kavanaugh, and this is our Government Finance Officers Association. And
Yes.
I think Director King will be
Again.
starting us off.
Yes, well, we're very excited to have Shane from GFOA joining us in today's meeting to present this risk-based reserve analysis as a precursor to potentially rethinking reserves, as GFOA likes to refer to it, in the near future. Brad touched on this a bit earlier in today's study session. So also joining the meeting, potentially, by Zoom is Max Pinchuk from GFOA, there he is, who worked alongside Shane to complete this analysis. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Shane.
All right. Well, thanks so much, and thank you for having me out here to chat with you today about reserves. So I'm going to be going through a little PowerPoint presentation that really recaps the major points of the report. So if we're good to go on the PowerPoint, we can go ahead and get started. But the basic idea here is I'm going to be going through these 5 steps that you see up in front of you on the PowerPoint. And at any time, do feel free to ask questions, of course. And the goal here really of this presentation is to really help the town become prepared to think about reserves, as Celia mentioned, in this kind of rethought way. So let's hop into the first of our 5 steps. And that first step is, what are we talking about when we're talking about reserves? And I'd like to begin with this idea of a mental model. So the world, as we're talking about the different public finance problems as part of the strategic planning, and it's complex stuff, right? So we all have mental models to help us navigate these things and simplify the world. So when we're talking about reserves, let's kind of see what that means when we're talking about reserves. So first, let's define reserves themselves. In a nutshell, reserves, and it's right there in the name, it's the money held out of the budget. It's money held in reserves so that if it turns out you don't have enough money from your current taxes and fees in a given year, you can bring some of that money in. It's held in reserve, right? Because typically we really finance our expenditures through current taxes, current fees. And really what reserves are, they're kind of like the accumulated surplus over many years, all the years the town has been in existence. Some of those years it's generated surpluses, those add up to the reserve. So now let's get to the mental model part. So what is a traditional mental model when we're talking about reserves? You may have heard this at some point in your career as council people, is the savings account, right? This is the town savings account. And certainly there's a lot of value to this mental model, so I'm not suggesting it's a bad mental model. It's easy to grasp. It's got a very good parallel to our personal lives, right? So it's got certainly many things to recommend it. Though I'd also suggest there are some important limitations we want to be aware of. And the kind of most important of those is that really savings are really in our minds thought of as almost more of deferred spending. So I'll give you just a quick example. On my prior slide there, you look at all my clip art. What are those little buckets? House, vacation, college, all of that is deferred spending, right? So same thing, right? Our mental model may think of reserves as deferred spending. And it implies that more is better. Now, the alternative mental model we can think about as an insurance policy, because what is really the point of reserves? I would suggest here that reserves have a key role in managing those unplanned, unavoidable expenditures, right? That is an insurance policy, as we talked about in the report. Earthquakes, wildfires, floods, and more are all the sorts of unplanned, unavoidable things that might happen to the town and where a quick and decisive response is going to be needed. And also point out another thing about my art is when I was looking around for like clip art for insurance or metaphors for insurance, what came up every single time? An umbrella. And what is another word for reserves that some folks may have heard of?
Umbrella policy.
Rainy day fund, I heard it. Yes, exactly, right? Not a coincidence. So I would suggest there is that connection there, right? So that's going to now bring me to step 2 is like, all right, well, if reserves are insurance policy, what exactly are we insuring against? So first I want to really kind of draw a distinction between this idea of a shock and a stress. And I heard you all talking about the idea of resiliency earlier. This is straight out of resiliency science. What this is getting at is like there are 2 kind of, we'll call it forces that might impact your budget. You can consider a shock a short but sharp decline, right, with the natural disaster being the classic example of such a thing. A stress, and we were just talking about stresses a minute ago, would be pension. That would be a stress where that is going to be going on for a long-term time period and exerts pressure on the budget over the long term. And I would submit to you that reserves are going to be more useful for stresses because reserves are a non-renewable resource, right? If you have, let's say, let's make up a number here for the purpose of my example, $10 million in reserve, you spend it on 1 year, you don't get that $10 million back the next year, right? But if you say have TOT, that replenishes itself each year. By TOT, I mean transit occupancy tax for those that don't know. So I'm drawing those distinctions, and we are going to be focusing mainly on the shock part of thing, but I do want to acknowledge that for a complete resilience strategy, you do want to be thinking about both shocks and stresses. So what are some of these shocks? Natural catastrophes, this is straight out of an excellent report that Napa County does, where they even have a little section on the town and the salient disasters that the town is subject to, and the county's disaster plan identifies earthquakes, wildfires, and floods as the top risks. It also has dam failure as not in the red zone, but certainly a notable one in the yellow zone, so we took note of that. TOT, so transit occupancy taxes, this is not news to anybody here, but is the #1 revenue, of course, for the town, and my little chart there just shows kind of the amount it is compared to the others in. It is vulnerable to interruptions, right? It's tourism, all those sorts of things, recessions could potentially reduce TOT revenues. And then some other risks we looked at include cyber attacks and pandemics and infectious disease, with COVID-19, of course, being the most salient example, and cyber attacks being, I think, a really great example for why you want to do this kind of analysis, because 10 years ago, no one was talking about cyber attacks when it came to a town's reserves. Now we are. So just being kind of mindful of the threat environment and updating ourselves, very important. So let's move on to step 3, determine the amount of exposure to the risks. So how did we do this? So let's start out with natural catastrophes. So what we did there is we went through FEMA records to look at all the earthquakes, the wildfires, flood examples we could find in California since 1999, and then scaled those to the town, adjusting for population and inflation, but also adjusting for some other very important factors. #1 on that list being the town's small size, right? Town is less than 5,000 people, so if you have a disaster, one of these disasters here, I think that presents a, we'll call it, more important danger than in a much larger city. So just to give you an example, right? It's easy to understand. The center of a very large city is going to be, by definition, further from the wildland-urban interface, right? But a town here, like the center of the town, no point of the center or no point in this town is that far from the wildland-urban interface, right? So just a simple example of how small size is important. And then also, there's not been an earthquake above 6.8 in California since 1999. As we all know, we're in an earthquake-vulnerable area. So we contracted with a very large insurance provider to provide us some simulations of earthquakes up far beyond 6.8, so up to like what you might consider maximum plausible sizes to get a sense of what the loss could be. And then lastly, we have a dam here in the vicinity that could potentially, as I mentioned, fail, so we did take that into account as well. And the other point I want to bring up is when we're talking about natural catastrophes, we have this hockey stick shape, which I think is very important for these low frequency, high consequence disasters, and why this is super important. As we're looking at all that data, we are not looking at like average numbers. The average is kind of in the middle there, and we are not concerned about average, right? Because an average would be like maybe a tremor that you hardly even feel, because those happen all the time. That would technically be, right, it's closer to your average earthquake. We're concerned about something closer to the proverbial big one, right, where this is reaching catastrophic levels. And this is true. You find this hockey stick shape in all sorts of natural catastrophes, especially wildfires, floods, and earthquakes, which we are primarily concerned about. So when we're looking at those numbers, we are looking at the tail end of things, as the term goes. So next is how do we analyze exposure to revenue instability. So the first thing we want to acknowledge is that the town's tax base has changed a lot in 15 years. And I say 15 years because we want to look back to past recessions as analogs to see what happened might happen in future recessions. That's like the 2001, the 2008, but a lot has changed since then, right? So one would have to question whether or not what happened here in the town in the 2008 recession is really useful information for what we might expect in a future recession. So to address that, we looked at a number of other municipalities in the region, with the city of Napa being chief among them. Pretty close. It hasn't changed radically in its tax base, certainly not compared to the town in the last 15 years, to see what happened in those places during the recession. That was one of our key elements there, was to look at these analogs. And also we looked at, this includes for fire and COVID, we looked at the effect of not only recessions, but of the 2017 fires and COVID in those towns as well. And then the last point is we did look at where the locations of hotels in the town are relative to the natural catastrophe risks. And the good news is that they're in locations that are at less risk than average than other parts of the town. So not to say no risk or low risk, but just lower than average, which is a good thing. All right, and then lastly is how do we analyze exposure to cyber and pandemics? So the town has a very robust cyber insurance policy, but we did take a look at it in depth to look at what we might call retained risks. So no insurance policy is going to cover everything. If it did, it would cost you like 20 times as much as you're paying. So every insurance policy you have, right, is going to be balancing between the cost to maintain that policy and the coverage. So we did kind of look at and point out where are these retentions, and the reserve may have a role in covering some of those retentions. But good news is there are not that many of them, and it doesn't seem to really be a really clear and present danger. And then I did mention earlier, we did look at the experience of other towns when it came to both the 2017 fires as well as the pandemic risks. So that's how we really analyze each of these different risks. And so that brings us to step 4, is how do we put this all together? So I'm not going to go through the amount associated with each risk, because that might get a little, we'll call it dry, but it is in the report in some detail if you want to take a look at it. But just the highlight is, for each of those risks that I mentioned, we identified a high and a low impact from our data. So in other words, you can take a look at we looked at different considerations to really determine what might be an appropriate high and low estimate. So if we take a look at earthquakes, for example, we looked at that extra insurance company data I mentioned to say, well, what if we did get the proverbial big one? What does the insurance company data suggest that would look like over and above what we could get from the FEMA records, since those were limited to 6.8 and below, right? So that would be an example of where we might have high and low figures. And we add up these numbers across all those different risks I described earlier. We have a total between 3.7 and 9.3. So you might say to yourself, well, that's a pretty big range, right? So the next question is, how do we start thinking about where we want to be within that range? And that's where we're going to get to, which is in step 5 here, is settling on a reserve target. So first of all, full disclosure here is GFOA can't tell you what the exact right amount is, because it's going to be a function of your risk appetite. And if you're not familiar with this term, it's an insurance term of art. A simple example would be this. Like, imagine I tell you something is low risk, but you know that I love betting on sports, and you've never so much as bought a lottery ticket in your life. Do we think that we would have the same definition of low risk, right? Probably not. So the point being is you have to bring your own attitudes as public officials to what is considered acceptable risk for the town, and hence I cannot substitute my attitudes for yours. And full disclosure, I do not bet avidly on sports. All right, but no judgment if you do. And the next point here is, another point I want to make is, regardless of any of that, is I would encourage you all to consider the idea of a range as opposed to the single number. And the idea here is that everyone's going to have some different risk appetites on the board, I'm guessing, and you can accommodate different attitudes with a range, and it provides a clear course of action, right? If you pick the single number, we want our reserves to be X, exactly X. The reserves are never going to be exactly X, right? They're going to be above or below. And then what do you do, right? If you've got, just say, making a number here, if you pick $10 million and it's at 10.5 or 11, is that good or is that too much? I don't know, right? So you need that range, right, to be able to have clear boundaries for action. Just a little example. This is from a much larger city, Tempe, Arizona, where they had the single number reserve. They had a lot of non-value added debate whether or not their reserve equal to 30% of expenditures was good, considering that their policy said 25. Like, well, 30 is more than 25. Is that a good thing? I don't know. So they eventually decided on this range, which they call the golden cone of prosperity. And the idea is that over time they wanted the reserve to come into this range, and if it's in the range, that's good. No more action needed. If it's outside the range, clear course of action suggested, right? If it's too much, we should spend it on something else, or otherwise we redirect those funds somewhere. Too little, we need to do something to build it up. And you may notice this is back in 2009. I love this example because they still do this today. So this shows it's got staying power, right? So this is something that has worked for them for the long term. And then the last thing I wanted to really mention to you here is this idea about risk appetite. And there are a lot of other factors, or we identified a number of other factors you might think about to help hone your attitudes about risk. So I kind of listed them all out there, and I'll just pick off a few of the key ones. And one of the big ones that people often ask about is, what about FEMA or Cal OES, which is the Office of Emergency Services here in the state that provides financial assistance to local governments in the case of a catastrophe. Well, in our research, FEMA reimbursement takes an average of 18 months to be received, right? And that's an average, so it's not always 18. It could be a lot longer. And so that means that FEMA reimbursement is useful for replenishing reserves, but is not a substitute for reserves, right? Because you have to be able to respond quickly and decisively to these natural catastrophes. And then, as you may know, they only reimburse 75% in any case, so there's still that 25% that you have to cover. Another big one is simultaneous risk events. So all of those things that I mentioned, highly unlikely that every single one will happen at the same time, right? So the idea here is that given that, that probably suggests that you can take on a little more risk than perhaps like some of the highest numbers that we suggested might indicate. We use historical data here, so climate change would not be reflected in historical information about, let's say, like wildfire sizes or floods and that sort of thing, so that might be a consideration. Unknown unknowns. So I gave you that example of the cyber risk earlier, right? 10 years ago, no one was talking about cyber. That was an unknown unknown 10 years ago. 10 years from today, we might look back and no one was talking about risk XYZ, and here we are like building it into our risk analysis, right? So you may want to think about kind of some, that is an issue. We talked about small town and TOT dependency. That's kind of baked into the numbers already, but I do like to highlight that. Spending cuts is a big one. So what we're getting at there is I have never witnessed in my career with GFOA a town where recession comes along and we're going to backfill every single lost dollar with reserves, right? People say, well, how can we cut our budget a little bit, right, to tighten our belts and kind of adjust ourselves to the recession. So there is that potential within the town budget, of course, and working with the good folks in the finance department, we identify what may be some plausible levels there. Commercial insurance certainly helps. So this town is part of an insurance pool that provides commercial insurance coverage for some of the town's potential losses, like maybe damage to facilities. Then lastly, opportunity costs, and I did that one as a question mark. And what we're getting at here is that reserves are not costless to hold. In the private sector, there's a term called cost of capital, right? Like an actual interest rate on, or actually rate, I should say, that is assigned to held funds. Unfortunately, things aren't that nice and neat in the public sector. We don't have a nice, neat number like that, but there are things that you might want to do with the money, right, other than hold it in reserve. And the council just have to think about, well, what is the potential value of doing those things versus having this insurance policy, right? And it's not either or, of course. There's different sizes of insurance policies that you can think about, but I think opportunity costs have to be brought into and thought about as part of the conversation. So the next steps here is take some time as the council to think about your risk appetite, and this information was provided. There's a lot of information here, obviously. So take some time to mull it over and think about it. And we'd like to suggest that the council consider formalize its decision in the form of a policy, and we've got a number of different characteristics of such a policy that we might suggest. So distinguishing between insurance policy and savings accounts. So again, not suggesting savings accounts are bad. In fact, I think they're great. You're just having both the insurance policy mental model and the savings accounts together is what leads to maximally savvy financial decisions. Establish a target range as opposed to a single point. Think about this range as percent of the town's expenditures so that it grows and changes with your budget, right? So it's kind of flexible and adaptable. Describe the purposes that the reserves can be used for. So I think just highlighting that reserves can be used for designed or intended for non-recurring expenditures is important. It goes back to that shock stress thing I described earlier. And then lastly is describe the intention to replenish reserves as they drop below the target range, and to direct them to other purposes if they get above. And the staff here are going to be working on a comprehensive reserve policy for the town to consider in the new year, in February specifically. And at this point, happy to take any questions, or otherwise go where you'd like to go.
You mentioned earlier cybersecurity. All my friends and various companies and places, it's like locked down. You can't do anything for a week, and it's a mess. So you said you took a look at our cyber policy. So can you give us 30 seconds on what we have and how adequate it is? And do you have any personal experience with other municipalities and cyber attacks?
Yeah. So, in fact, we have a whole bunch of stuff on this. So I was like, I'm going to restrain myself from going off on like an hour on this topic. But so the kind I've got up here is like kind of the highlights here, right? So what are the risks that the town is retaining? And the first one is deductible costs, especially if the town is responsible for covering multiple deductibles. And we kind of wrote about this in the report at a little bit of length, but what it's getting at is in the policy there are a number of different cyber coverages, right? So like if you get hit by an attack could trigger one of any of about 20 different coverages that are in the policy, and each of these different coverages has a deductible associated with it, right? So you could imagine if, like, say, an attack triggers 5 different coverages, right? And each coverage has its own deductible, right? Those deductibles could add up, right? But it depends, and that's what's called a multiple retention policy, where you would have to pay each deductible for each coverage. A single retention is where you just pick the single highest retention out of all the coverages that are triggered, and you have to pay just that one. So the multiple retention one could conceivably be a lot more costly to the town if a big attack triggers multiple types of coverages, right? So I would say that's probably the most worth clarifying with your provider. So I think that's probably the most immediately salient. Damage in excess of any of the sublimits we're getting at there is the whole policy has a limit of $2 million, but then each coverage has a sublimit associated with it that is less than $2 million, right? So just being aware that, well, it's not actually $2 million, and let's say, I think one of the coverages, if I'm remembering correctly, is for ransomware, right? So it's not like we've got $2 million in ransomware coverage. You've got $2 million for the entire policy, but then it's the sublimit for ransomware would apply to ransomware attack. And then the last one was uncovered risks, which should be remote, and we're getting at here things like acts of war. And if you ever noticed in like your insurance policy that's always in the fine print, acts of war, and we just kind of in the past, or they have a better case to call it an act of war. Things like those apply to even your more run-of-the-mill cyber attack, but that would be like the top 3, we'll call it like retained risks that we found in the policy.
Can you so give me an example of a cyber attack? We wake up in the morning, everyone comes to work, and it's like, oh my gosh, cyber attack. How do we know we had one?
Sure, great question. So the kind of number one cyber attack that local governments are subject to is ransomware attack, and there's a lot of different ways this could happen. We actually just did a whole thing about this for our GFOA membership. If you're not familiar with us, we're 25,000 local governments across the country, and we had the Aon, which is a big giant insurance company, kind of online to host it. And they brought up the point, and also CISA, which is I forget what that stands for, but the National kind of Cyber Intelligence Group for the federal government. And they kind of brought up the point that social engineering tends to be where the vector of most of these attacks come in from. So this would be like, for example, someone kind of gets to know you a little bit and sends you an email, and then you click on the link, and like you've now just brought this malware into the system. and then it locks down all of your files, right? So the idea is all these files are locked down, you can't access them, and then they contact you with a ransom to say, well, pay us or you never see your files again. So that's really kind of, I would call the most common vector and type of attack that a local government would experience.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, are you kind of done?
Oh, yeah.
So, first of all, I found all 61 pages fascinating. It took me a long
excellent.
time to go through all this, but, I think it's, I know I don't have much risk when I'm worrying about somebody else's money. I probably take a little bit more on my personal money, but when there's somebody else's money, so my risk changes in terms of what I feel like my responsibility is. So, when we're really kind of, looking at some of these, possible disasters that we could, experience, and that is what keeps me up at night. But, and how much, and different models for putting away, reserves. So there's a lot of useful information, I think, in this document about, how we really look at this and think about this collectively. So I just found it very fascinating and very informative. So is this something that we do yearly or periodically? Or because I know, earthquakes, fires, and dam breaking doesn't change very much every year. But, or is this something we haven't done in a while? I just don't remember.
I don't know that we've, at least from what I reviewed, ever done it like this.
Right.
Each year as part of your budget, you look at fiscal policies, your reserves are a component of that. Long story short, when we got here and Celia and I started talking, we explored different opportunities. And actually, we saw a report GFOA did for the city of Napa, and that was very close to like what we were looking for. So through Celia, she contacted them. So that's the short story. So this was, and this is, as I've explained to all of you, the first step in a 2 or 3 step process to have a comprehensive policy,
Right.
which should carry through. You can look at it, I would say, every maybe 5 years or so. It should definitely have a useful life. And you get into a lot of these, sort of, I think, appetite sort of questions that he was referring to. So I've heard a lot of different things, but then it also, to me, is a key to your budget parameters, because you want to know kind of these things as a staff before we present a budget to you, because obviously reserve levels, especially when they're a range, gives you that ability to come back and give you options as a council to say, okay, do you want to fund these projects? If so, you're going to have to take your, if your range is 25 to 50%, you have to go down to 25%, the low end of your range, and then you can build X, Y, Z. So it's fundamental, in my view, to budgeting, but, getting here and sort of hearing all of you kind of have different views on this, we felt like this was really the appropriate first step.
I think it's really excellent, and I really appreciate it. So just real quick, give us a little flavor about other municipalities you're aware of, and, where, cyber attacks have really happened, and, did they happen just through clicking on the wrong link on social media or bringing it in and clicking on another link? Or is that common with other problems in municipalities that you've seen?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So number one, it's hard to tell how common it is because, and this is something GFOA is working to change, one of the great strengths of municipalities is that we share information with each other, right? Like I'm sure you've all had that experience. Cyber attacks, people tend to play it very close to the vest, so we don't have great data on how common they are compared to a lot of other risks that I just talked about, like floods. I could tell you exactly who's experienced a flood and how much they've paid. I can't tell you that for cyber attacks, so we are working though to get better data available. I think another, I guess, maybe indicator is the insurance market. Right, last year got very tight. In fact, a number of GFOA members were not able to get insurance at all, or their premiums doubled, which tells you, right, that is a clue.
Absolutely.
That, yes, big clue, that the danger is real. And it is, when I said that the cyber attacks are the number one danger, I did not tell you, but this is also true, that local governments, by some measures, are the most popular target for ransomware attacks for many reasons. But the point being is that also is a clue, right, when they can at least measure, compared to other industries, what is the relative risk to local government? The relative risk is quite high. So that also tells us that local government is, we'll call it, like in a vulnerable place. And it doesn't really, I think the other kind of thing I'd mention is there's a weak link between the size of the organization and the total damages. And obviously, like, the city of Los Angeles is going to have more potential damages than the town. That's not, of course, but it's not like completely linear. In other words, like there's not like one for one. Which tells us that smaller municipalities are vulnerable to big risks. And really, it goes back, if you remember the hockey stick shape thing. Cyber risks fall on a hockey stick, so they have that same hockey stick sort of loss pattern that, like, say, earthquakes or wildfires or floods do. So I'd say that's probably some of my key findings of our research on this topic.
So maybe the cyber attackers just aren't that smart to look at going after rich people versus poor people. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the city governments, have a very public profile, right? So that makes it easy for cyber attackers to figure out who they are, who is this local government, and there's all these different departments. So this is called like a attack surface. So local governments have a very big attack surface, they have a very public profile. So a lot of these kind of features of local government that are just kind of part of the way we do business that are, you can't change this, right? We're not going to become secret organizations, just make it more vulnerable to cyber, but just by the nature of the beast, if that makes sense.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Councilmember Tripp.
Just real quick on cyber security before pardon me, but I do want to point out that Jason, our IT manager, to me is he's not in the room, right? But he gave me the overview of how he's, we talk about resiliency. This is a different forum, but he's on it. When I got here, I'd never seen kind of the, how we log in and we have to do the dual login and you have all these emails quarantined. And so I will tell you, maybe one of the reasons, small agencies are more vulnerable would be because they don't have people full-time like Jason working to defend us and be proactive. And so I was very impressed just listening to him. So not to say we're, because I do think transparency, this word, is one of our weaknesses when we get into this world, because we do have so much data available to the public. It provides, I can't remember how you just put it, but a pretty broad targets. But I'm very impressed with Jason, I just would say, and I think continuing to invest in resiliency. I mean, I don't understand it all, but whenever Jason asks me, or should we do it, it's usually, yeah, let's do it. So I think that's the other thing to be mindful of and be appreciative of with Jason and the role he has.
Okay, thanks.
So I had a couple questions, and I'm hoping not to get too burdened down, but some of the answers, I don't know when I'll have a chance maybe to ask them again, and also maybe the rest of the council. One of the things that's hard about being on a council is we can't necessarily all talk about stuff at another juncture. On the cyber, I think what you're saying is we need to make sure how the policy works in terms of because it's not clear, basically, is what you're saying, how the deductibles would work.
In that one area, yeah. Otherwise, it's very comprehensive.
Right. And I thought it was good news, the auditor, one of the parts about cyber that would concern me is credit card information. Mm-hmm. And the auditor indicated that he didn't see much of as big a risk there. And I'd also have to agree with what Brad said. We seem to have very good IT support on it, but so all that's good. So I'm going to ask, I was sort of, one of my things to kind of understand is the earthquake risk kind of to begin with. And because it's a big number when you look at your chart and you add them all up, and that's how you get to the big number of 10 million. So generally, and you said this in your report, reserves kind of function like an insurance policy. And in the world of risk management that I came out of, if you're going to either buy insurance for a risk once you've evaluated it, identified it, either buy insurance or you make a decision to self-insure. And you self-insure when you have enough resources to do that over time and you're going to save money, Otherwise, you transfer the risk over to the insurance company. So I'm just kind of going through the thought process. So one of the things that when I looked at your earthquake number, it's a large number. It seemed to me it would be good information to be able to know how much of that would actually be insured, because it typically in a risk management model, you don't both self-insure via reserves and insure. And although we have, I think, very reasonable coverage at $100,000 a year through CIRA, the pool, much of which of that is reinsured. So that's very reasonable coverage. So I'm not sure, though, that, so wouldn't that be worth digging into a little bit more?
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Just like what you did with cyber, we could figure out.
In fact, we were just talking about it before the meeting. I think about what the deductibles were and limits and that sort of thing, so 100% with you.
Yeah, and then just also, anytime you're in a pool, you also have to evaluate the solvency of the pool, right? You know, which it seems like the pool is functioning well and they have very good actuarials and yada yada and reinsurance, but that's always an issue. But putting that aside, we don't want to double cover stuff. So that would be one comment I had on the earthquake, which is a big number. And it's a wonderful report. I've read a lot of these, and I really, really liked it. And one of the things I really liked, it was very data-driven. And so when you look at your earthquake number, you did a lot of great analysis looking at previous losses in Napa, previous losses in California, what could come back from FEMA. But then I got kind of a little bit lost because you did your analysis, and you said that in 10% of the cases, losses could be over $380,000, and in 5% of the cases, the losses could be greater than $565,000. This is on page 5. Mm-hmm. So now we're up to 5%. So that's a small portion of the losses, yep. But still something you got to pay attention to. High severity, low frequency is not anything you want to ignore because those are the ones that are actually going to tank you. So we got to 565. Okay, so I get that. And then you did what I thought was a really good analysis. You looked at what we lost in 2014 earthquake, and then you didn't exactly say how you adjusted it, but I'm guessing you adjusted it for inflation and whatnot. You got to 910. And then that's where you kind of lost me because you said that it wouldn't be unreasonable to double your 5% analysis estimate of 565 to get to 1.3 million or 1.13 million. So now we've doubled kind of the outlier, which is the 5% loss, to 1.13. And then you also proposed we could just double the 910, which was our 2014 loss adjusted, to get to 1.8. Mm-hmm. Apart from doubling, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that's
sure.
A big number.
Yeah, let me take that.
What, especially when you started out at 565 at the 5%.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I had two questions. One, we already kind of resolved that it's worth looking at the insurance, but the other is I liked your analysis, but you kind of lost me towards the end.
Sure. Good news is this is an easy one. So I mentioned earlier the 6.8 limitation. So all that data is based on earthquake 6.8 and below, but of course it could be higher than 6.8. So given that, that's a problem. So we went to the Aon. I mentioned them earlier, big insurance company. We bought a data set from them of where they give you losses. They have a whole department that does nothing but earthquake simulations, and they gave us a run of earthquake simulations that showed that went up to whatever 8.0 or something like this, right? So, and then along with losses they would predict with each of those things, and that went all the way down to 5.0. So we compare 5.0 to 8.0 and all these sorts of things. So when we segmented it, we saw that earthquakes above 6.8 tend to generate about twice the losses of earthquakes below 6.8 because it's interesting to know these magnitude figures are not linear. So when you kind of say magnitude, it's not a straight line. It goes another hockey stick shape in action. So point being is that's where that doubling comes from. If we're taking into account of the risk of you're subject to a 8.0 or maybe not a bit much, even 7.0 or whatever, right? 7.5, something like this. That's where the doubling comes in.
So
is we're trying to accommodate that.
If you were at the 5%, so that's the 5%. 95% is covered. Was at 565
of 6.8s or below.
Okay, so what percentage would you say when we go to the larger earthquake are you at now in terms of the potential frequency? If 5% was 565 and we went to 1.8, would we be at 1%?
Oh yeah, I mean that would be very high. So I would say you are definitely probably up around 99 5%, because the town was one of the worst, if not the worst, right, single experiences in the data set we have. And then if you're saying, well, what if we're planning for a really big earthquake, right, that is going to be like a number of, we'll call it like highly infrequent events.
Right. So you're way out there at the 1.8.
That is kind of, we'll call it like high estimate of, if we want to be super conservative, that is taking into account both a really big earthquake, right, that's going to be very rare, and also having a really high number of damages from that.
Right. And then not factoring in FEMA and insurance and all that. But I liked your earthquake analysis. I really liked that you looked where the hotels were. But I'm going to keep moving because I don't want to take up too much time. So the other thing that I was going to your chart where you add up all the different risks. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I was trying to kind of understand is there is kind of a potential there, and you noted this in the factors we might want to consider when we establish the reserve, of double coverage. Mm-hmm. So you have, for example, a $1.5 million one for recession risk, and also a $5 million for pandemic, which was also a kind of a stand-in for TOT interruption. Mm-hmm. But the recession risk is probably, a lot of that is related to TOT, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because other than, well, maybe property taxes. If everybody started having their houses reassessed, we could lose property taxes. But basically, recession is TOT. So we've covered that in recession at 1.5. But then pandemic at $5 million, yes, there would be costs associated with operational costs, but a lot of that also is TOT, right? Mm-hmm. So if we were just to add the 1.5 and the 5, aren't we double covering?
Yeah, and that kind of gets at what this simultaneous risk is getting at. Like, so what are the odds you're going to have a recession and then a pandemic, right? Like right after it?
Right.
Both of these are rare. So having them both at the same time or right on top of each other, unlikely. So I think that is a fair statement, and one that you should take into account into your risk appetite.
Okay. And right, because that kind of also goes with, we could have a pandemic and a recession, but the pandemic would probably solve the recession problem. I mean, we would be paying for the pandemic, and
sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying. Because it's kind of like on my house insurance. I do have earthquake. It could fall in an earthquake, or it could burn down. But I'm not. And let's just say the house is going to cost $500,000 to rebuild. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to buy $1 million of coverage. It's either going to burn down or it's going to fall down in an earthquake. But do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
And same idea also on. Some of why I was a little trying to understand, it goes along with what you're saying. If I was looking at how much liability insurance I needed for my house, whether it's true, my dog could bite somebody and somebody could trip over the sidewalk, but the chances that I'm going to need to cover both those events in the same year are probably pretty low. Mm-hmm. Or we get further, and I guess it's further and further remote, right?
Yep.
Would you say that's a fair statement?
Absolutely true, yeah.
So that's a good thing then to take into account when we look at the range?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, 100%.
So what would the words you would use to identify that issue, that we don't want to be either double covering stuff or anticipating too many risks piling up all in one year?
Yeah, great. So two things. One is diversification. So you're all familiar with diversification, right? In our stock portfolios, where we invest in different stocks to reduce risk. So having all these risks in your kind of that list, that's sort of like a form of diversification, right? Where there's all these different risks, and it's probably not all going to happen at the same time. So you've almost like you're diversified in that way, right? And the other way I would kind of word I bring is interrelated risk. So we did mention in the report that like dam break and earthquake are highly interrelated, right? So the analysis of the dam says, well, the dam is probably not going to break on its own. It would only break if there was a strong earthquake, probably, right? So those would be interrelated types of risks. So kind of keeping in mind which ones are interrelated and which ones are not are kind of key to realizing the full benefits of this diversification. So it's like those two things have to be thought about to really kind of, I think, make the savviest decision on this point.
And I did really like the chart with the arrows that said which factors we should think about that would go up or down. And then my final question is, on the best kind of practices, and I think the mayor sort of asked you about this, but there's always multiple ways to look at stuff. And I like this because you really got into the data and we built it this way. But some people just say, well, we're going to do 30% of our general fund. Or, I mean, and I'm just parroting what I've heard in my 1 year in government. So, and a lot of people, I think, do. And so if we were to adopt the reserve of $10 million, we'd almost be 100% of our general fund revenue. The best practice, it may not be 30%, but it's not necessarily 100%, right? Or this is your
yeah, exactly. So number one, the question of best practice, right? I would consider those rules of thumb, like where the 30% comes from is bond rating agencies, so AAA. They just raised it recently to 35, so maybe you'll hear 35 floating around the world. But that used to be kind of what the bond rating agencies would look for when they were assessing credit. So it kind of got out there that, hey, 30% is this good number. Another rule of thumb is 2 months or 16%. So that is a rule of thumb that GFOA uses. Like if you don't have better information available, then 2 months is a pretty good rule of thumb. But we have better information available, right? So we would suggest that if you can do a risk analysis, that is the optimal way to determine what amount of reserves you need. But in absence of that, rules of thumb, like what the rating agencies say or the 2 months thing, could be useful. Does that answer the question?
Well, it does. But let me ask you: in your practice, do you encounter many municipalities that do 100% of the general fund revenue?
Oh, yeah, I see what you. Oh, sorry. So I think the big issue here is the size of the town, right? So we work with like San Diego County and Denver to the largest, all the way to the town being the smallest, right? And the size is just super important. So I used to be the assistant city manager for a town of 5,000 people before GFOA. And we had like forests. Everything was like, forest preserves everywhere and like bridges and all this kind of thing. And a flood came along and washed out 100% of the bridges in our town. The next town over, which is a big town, they did not have 100% of their bridges washed out, right? Because it's just a much larger place, right? So kind of small places are undiversified, right? So just remember that key diversification. Very little geographic diversification because it's a little area and the flood was in our one little area and it washed out all 3 bridges, right? So that kind of, we'll call it lack of diversification that you find in small town geography, it tends to be a reason that we see smaller municipalities have a lot more reserves. Like in where I was, in the Chicagoland area, we didn't have wildfires, we didn't have earthquakes. We had floods, obviously. Our reserve was at 50%.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful. And I know the small town is it would be hard to quantify that, but I totally get what you're saying because it's not just geographic, but in our case, it's also then it leads into the fact that a lot of the revenue comes from 3 hotels or however many, if we counted them up.
Great point.
Okay. Thank you. I really thought it was an excellent report.
Oh, thank you, and excellent questions from the group.
And that was my sum, too, when you really are kind of throwing out some of these numbers, and I know that they're all over the place, and you brought up some good examples, but, unlike most places, unless you've had another example like us, we're so heavily dependent on TOT versus property tax like most places. So, what's the likelihood of all the houses getting wiped out versus, our income hotels? So somehow I think we're just going to have to come up with that factor on our own.
Yeah, and I think this gives you the boundaries, and as I can, what I'm looking for, kind of your point, like there are considerations where like the 2 extremes of the boundary are just that, they're extremes, right? So like, well, do we want to be at the extremes of either end?
Right.
I would, of course, leave that to you, but that would be a worthy discussion to have, and then like, where then in the boundaries do we want to land in terms of our policy? Based on our unique situation. All right, Vice Mayor Knight.
Thank you for your report. I think it's really appropriate now for us to. I appreciate the report, and I'm glad now. For many years, the councils have been very responsible, been putting money into reserves. But I think it's a good time for us to look at what an appropriate level is, and it's interesting though. I think over the last 25 to 30 years, we've had earthquakes, we've had flooding in this community, but in the last 25 years, when we talk about our being a town very heavily dependent on TOT, we've been through kind of three events that have impacted, like our TOT, 9/11, and then the 2017 fires, and then the pandemic, and each one of those had kind of a particular impact. 9/11 being immediate because of national crisis, a drop off on visitors, which came back pretty quickly, versus COVID, where we saw a more significant drop off because of that health issue. So we've kind of been there where we've seen the impact of national events affecting our TOT, and I think it's good for us to spend that time now to figure out where we should be in a healthy state. In terms of funding for either TOT events, but that could be impacted by the big one in the San Francisco Bay Area, where people just don't come to the Bay Area because of a major earthquake or something. So, thank you for your information. I'm looking forward to our conversations next year, talking about our reserves.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Don't see any more light. Have a little box.
Oh,
with
I see. I was
lights.
wondering how you did that. I'm like,
Yeah,
wow,
we
she's
have a
really
little-
good.
It's
Mayor?
magic. It's behind
If
the
I could
screen here. So.
offer just one comment
Yes, please.
pertaining to cybersecurity and to hopefully put Councilmember Tripp a little bit at ease. For utility payments, for online payments, and other online payments taken through the town itself does not retain any credit card information. That's all done by third-party administrators to kind of keep us from having that risk. So hopefully that's good news.
Yeah, and I'm guessing because we do have really strong contracts that we probably in other words, they're responsible for all that.
They're responsible
That's not
for
our
all
problem.
the PCI compliance, yes.
Okay, that's great. That's good. That is good news because I think that's a big part of the risk, at least in my mind, part of the risk.
So,
I just want to add 2 points, and also thank you for the presentation. I thought you did a great job, and I'm glad it's well received. But 2 other factors as we go into February I want you to know that we're thinking about. We're trying to gather data. One is, what we refer to as our benchmark cities. So we do want to look at what the reserve levels are around us. And, we talked about targets are harder to find, right? But, generally they have to report their reserve levels. So it's pretty easy for us to do that. But the second point, when you talk about diversification, I would also tell you that when you have a reserve policy, it's usually a collection of reserves, right? It's not one reserve. We tend to focus a lot on the contingency or the emergency reserve. And I will tell you, you do have a policy of 20% here. But that is coupled, that's 20% of your general fund operating cost. On top of that, you have 25% of your TOT revenues that's part of the, used to be stabilization. We renamed it to something I can never remember, a long name. But if you put those 2 together, to me, that sort of is your contingency reserve. But then to have to me, a diverse reserve policy, you also want to consider things like major maintenance, vehicle replacement, other things that you should be, in essence, reserving for, if you will, if that's the right, but replenishing, because those costs are even though they are unforeseen, they are inevitable. And these are things like roofs, and obviously as cars break down and useful life things. So although we will do our best to, kind of create a single policy, this is a complicated thing of bundling a bunch of policies or reserves together. And I like the analogies of, savings account, checking account, and then insurance policies. And then also, whatever you want to call, if you're saving up for a house or saving up for a car, those are different types of saving accounts. But this is a great start, and I do think as we gather this data, we'll be in a place to present something to you as part of your budget parameters conversation, which would be, to me, the appropriate time for you to say whatever you want different. Okay? So thanks again.
thank you.
very much.
Yeah, thank you
My
very
pleasure to
much.
be here.
Thank you.
All right. Now it's time for our item 10, which is our only public hearing for this. It's almost is this afternoon or this evening. We are going to consider approving an amendment to our Town of Yountville zoning map. And we all received a handout earlier up here with the map.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Mueller. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. You should see a packet of a few maps in front of you. On the front of that packet is the updated map. The second page is a map that we updated last September. And on the back is the map you see on the wall. Do you have one? Do you need one?
I do, thank you.
Okay.
I don't want to be clicking with you on my drink. That's why I don't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. So the purpose of this presentation is to propose an ordinance to update the zoning map and to update a few small sections of the municipal code. The updates will clarify the authority that the town council has over the zoning map, and is to bring the map into compliance with all the existing land use designations. And so I want to clarify there are no proposed changes to any zoning designations. We're just making the map reflect all of the current zoning designations. Some of the changes that you'll see on this updated map that are missing on either the one from last year or before are we included the affordable housing overlay, the mixed residential 2, the sphere of influence, the corrected location of the mixed use overlay, correction of a portion of 6462 Washington Street to planned development, and then from last year's map looked pretty different than the one from before, so we just brought those colors back to look more familiar.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
One button. Kyle, is there any way to put this on a screen and do a little laser pointer? I mean, 'cause you're familiar with it when you say, I mean, I'm busy looking at the sphere of influence and you moved on to the next one. And
Yeah, sorry. I
yeah,
can.
luckily it's a small map, but.
Can I use the mouse?
Or even, maybe just even on this and we can all see it. Really? Oh, yeah, that's true.
A pointer on there.
Okay.
Do you have a map in your presentation?
Yeah, so I'll fast forward to
All
that
right.
slide.
Mixed residential.
Clicker seems to not be working. 2 more slides, please.
I need my cat toy. No, it's working.
So it looks like it doesn't. Can I use the mouse on that computer? Okay, I'll just jump over.
Thank you so much. Just, I want to know it.
So let's see. I don't have the list of the changes, but I think I remember them. So in the bottom, you'll see this is RM2. This was a new land use designation we adopted in September of last year as part of the housing element.
Okay.
The affordable housing overlay was adopted many years ago, but was not included on the map, and so you can see it's here. It's over here on Girardi Place, and it's on this parcel of property as well. And then
What is that space? Is it the?
that's the affordable housing overlay, and this space is the French Laundry Garden.
Oh, I thought you were down on the bottom. Okay, I'm trying to follow your mouse too.
Sorry.
Kyle, could you just tell us what the overlay means, or the affordable housing overlay means in
Yes.
general? Just in terms of that designation? 'Cause-
Yeah, I don't have a great understanding of it,
Okay.
but my understanding is that it just affords for some different general development standards.
Okay. So you have to right. The original color, like on the affordable housing, governs, and then it has kind of an added element to it. Is that?
Yeah, so it's the properties for which the overlay applies.
Okay.
It has its own zoning, and then it has this sort of second additional zoning
Okay.
requirements.
Okay. Thank you.
So, I mean, I remember this pretty well because this kind of came up quite a few years ago when we did our last or time before that, a housing element, and this was something that when I was studying a lot of those, we didn't have that. And so I kind of, asked if, we could add those overlays because they were 55 plus both mobile home parks. And actually, I only see one on here. I'm a little confused why I don't see both mobile home parks, but I'll
No,
hold
the other
on.
one's in the RM2 section, it seems like.
I know, but I don't see the streets and the little hash marks because I know that was a big anyway, let me finish this thought first. So the what we asked was that if we put this 55 plus secondary overlay on that, would that protect that property in case somebody who owned the mobile home park just wanted to go do something else? And that overlay, was my understanding, would remain. And there was also a lot of confusion when I think the last time we did this with the map, and we made sure that everybody in the mobile home parks, got notice that we were doing it. And because these are a little complicated, we're all kind of staring at these and understanding these ourselves. There was a lot of brouhaha about what are you doing to us and what's changing and all that. And we were just putting hash marks on a map. So just wanted to provide that to anybody in case this comes up. Because I did get one call, I heard, you're going to be changing the general plans. It's like, no, I don't think we're changing the general plan tonight. So they see sometimes some of these things, and they are difficult to kind of explain to people. So that's then my last question there is, how come you've got all the streets for one of the mobile home parks, but not the other?
Bella Vista is not there off of Champaign.
Bella Vista, the very south.
there, but it's yellow.
I believe they're both
Which
in there.
map are we looking at? I'm looking at the top map.
Yeah, with the pink for the orange.
I don't see any yellow.
That is Bella Vista right here, this part.
They're together. You don't see the
Yeah,
fencing.
this is the.
Champagne
Rancho.
Drive
Oh,
is-
yeah, because it's
And this
San
is Bella
Antonio,
Vista.
so this is Bella Vista, and the Yountville, Hotel Yountville sales office is right in here. So you go in and then you go down there.
So there's only one street, and then these are the only streets.
Yeah.
Champagne. and then the-
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Pam. That is
The
confusing
courts.
to quickly look at it.
Yeah, because all the other neighborhoods are separated except those two. But okay.
Yeah, so these two neighborhoods share the
Okay.
same zoning, so you can't see them super well.
Yeah, because this is a zoning
separated,
map, so
but it does
therefore
include
zoning. All right.
Yes,
Got
there's
it. All right.
a park here and a park here.
Okay.
And while you're still down in that quadrant, what is RM2? That's not mixed residential too, is it?
Yes, RM2 is mixed residential too, and it's very similar to mixed residential.
Okay.
It just has a different density, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And then you were in the purple for the overlay at Thomas Keller, and that's where I interrupted you.
Yes, so
That's underground.
the affordable housing overlay, I wrapped up that, but I'll go do it again. It's this property over here on Girardi Place, and down here in the south of town. And then we corrected the location of the mixed use overlay, and that is this section of town. On one of the maps, it's shown on this section of town, which is incorrect. This is the correct location.
I can't see them.
I know,
I don't see it.
The mouse is right there in the middle of where the business, maybe where R&D and stuff is.
So yeah, that's up in the north side of Washington Street, just south of, it's between Padroni Street and Creek Street.
And the purple overlay up above that, that's what didn't show, what's on the, sorry, I'm dyslexic here, the east side of Washington Street there
Yeah, so it's,
into neighborhood? There,
Old Town Commercial.
yeah. Okay.
yeah, so this is Old Town Commercial. There is no overlay over these properties. It's just regular land use.
Okay, thank you.
And then going down the list, we corrected a portion of 6462 Washington Street. I think
Where is that?
so this portion of 6462 Washington Street was previously zoned as residential scaled commercial, but it was changed to master planned a few years ago.
With,
No,
with
that's-
No,
Keller-
that
with
is-
Keller Properties.
Soyo, and it's where Hotel Yountville sales officers are, there are historic, off of Champaign?
It is a portion of Hotel Yountville. I'm not sure what
Yeah,
buildings are on
so
that.
that little
okay.
opening where they have the affordable apartments, and in front there are business offices.
The historic Gibbs House.
There you go.
Yes, thank you. And I believe, and then the addition of the sphere of influence. On the map from last year, this was left off, and this is the Domaine Chandon property, is the town's sphere of influence.
Yes.
So we just added that back.
Yeah, I thought Brad.
Do you know the number of acres? There was some discussion about this.
I believe it's close to 10.
Okay, thank you. That's what I think too.
I'm going to go back a few slides. And so those are all the changes for the map. Now we are changing the municipal code as well. These are both excerpts from the municipal code, and both sections have very minor changes, and it's just to add the underlined portion. And so I'll read the last sentence of both paragraphs. The first is Municipal Code Section 17.08.010. The last sentence reads, it's to reference the zoning map, and it reads, a copy of the zoning ordinance and the zoning map, and then to include, together with the record of all amendments, shall be kept on file with the town clerk and available at the planning and building department. So before, it didn't include, together with the record of all amendments. And then the second section, 17.18.040, the last sentence reads, the town council shall have the authority to approve, conditionally approve, or deny applications for zoning ordinance, zoning map, or general plan amendments. And we're just adding zoning map in there.
Okay. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to officially open the public hearing now. So do you have anybody from the public? I don't see any public who would like to speak. Mackenzie, do you want to tell me something?
Once public's done.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that since this is an ordinance or a change to your municipal code, it has to go through 2 public hearings. So we didn't indicate that as clearly as we should have, that this is the first reading in the introduction, so you're going to waive the first reading.
Okay.
So when you make your motion, we would recommend you say, introduce and waive first reading of the ordinance.
Thank you for that. So now I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to council. So thank you for giving us that information. So we can keep
I have one
talking or questions, or Vice Mayor Knight.
Just a quick question about retained commercial, which there's still that designation on. We have that on Weber and a short stretch of Washington between Weber and Creek. I'm not sure why I thought for some point when we changed some of the zone, like for the for those properties that retained commercial went away, but maybe not. I guess it's just I thought they became more of a different type of commercial zoning. When we like on the properties between Weber and Creek, either Bordeaux and all those, and also the house next door to it that was a home and now is a part of that property. Did that become more of like a residential scale commercial zoning than just a general retained commercial? Is there?
As far as I understand, that zoning has not changed from retained commercial.
Okay. That's all right. If I have further questions, I'll come talk to you about this issue. I just remembered some of the changes when those properties came up recently in the last maybe 2 to 3 years. There was some tweaking of what we considered or described as retained commercial. But thank you. I'll follow up.
I can certainly look into that as well.
Commercial. Okay.
The council's still studying up here. So we're going to give it just a few more minutes before I call for a motion. I sure hate to see what a big city looks like.
Oh my gosh. Affordable housing overlay. Okay.
I have a feeling we're about ready up here, so I'm going to ask the council If I can get a motion, and remember, it's the we're going to waive the first reading whenever somebody is ready.
I'm ready, but wording it is another thing.
I'm happy to make a motion to, once this pops up, thank you, I move approval of,
No, introduce.
I'm sorry?
If you don't mind, Vice Mayor Knight, if you refresh your screen, I updated the title for everybody to see there. That should help you with the motion.
Refresh my,
Your PrimeGov, if you have PrimeGov open with the meeting viewer.
Go back there. Okay.
He has the resolution open, so
Yeah.
he just has to say introduce.
sorry.
Waive the reading. Just say
okay.
introduce and waive the reading.
Thank you.
and
I move
read it.
approval of ordinance number 23-526 and waive the reading.
I second.
Do we need a little more language, Mackenzie?
Well, since it's not being approved at this time, approval might be misleading. We would rather say introduce and waive the first reading.
Thank you very much. I rephrase. I move that we introduce ordinance number 23-526, an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Yountville amending the town zoning map and other descriptions in the title, and waive the reading. Waive the first reading.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second, and when Eddie lets us know we're ready to vote, we'll vote.
The vote is now open.
Thank you.
And the ordinance carries.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. That's
Kyle, thank you.
that will be coming back. So there, number 11, we have no administrative or regular items tonight. And the next one is staff presentation and informational report on the emergency preparedness events.
All right. So this is just a quick debrief about the emergency preparedness workshops the town just held. Excuse me. So the town just held 3 emergency preparedness workshops with 3 different partners. Before I get into the individual events, I just want to point out that each event was marketed individually, together. We tried different avenues. Thanks to Samantha. Parks and Recs Director Samantha Holland and Hillary Gady, Deputy Town Clerk, and myself, we came up with a marketing strategy. We implemented it. We tried different things out. So we advertised on social media. We did a couple of video reels with Councilmember Mickey Kant and Eric Knight and a few of our partners, with the help of our IT specialist, Jason Bernard. And we also put ads in the Weekly Sun. We did, and also in the Recreation Guide. We did a lot of stuff for each event. Just to get the word out, just so people know that it was going to be different this time. Because in the past, the way we've done this event was like a fair. We had a lot of vendors, a lot of partners come. People would come, but it wasn't very well attended. So we were trying something new this year. So just want to emphasize that before we move on. So 3 events. So September 12th, we did a workshop with COAD, which emphasized meeting your neighbor. Firewise was October 19th. They specialized in fire safety, like structure hardening and defensible space. And American Red Cross was more general emergency preparedness, like how to prepare for a go bag, but like also how to prepare during like an earthquake, a flood, a little bit of fire, but just a lot of different emergencies. And each event required registration, but each event had a different amount. I would say COAD and American Red Cross were the most popular, but Firewise, there was a smaller group, but still a mighty group that joined. And we did have a lot of repeats. A lot of people came to 2 or all 3 events. Some people just came to 1. But there's definitely a group who came to like 3, like a core group, outside of our little group. We also had, and during each workshop, obviously, it's very structured, like a lecture question, very interactive, especially COAD, which emphasizes like talking to your neighbor, getting to know the people in your town, getting to know who do you go to in an emergency. So it was actually really nice because we did see people chit-chatting, people who had not known each other or did not know each other very well. We also had Napa OES at all 3 events. They basically they had a table there, and they basically were giving out information about Alert Napa County, trying to get people to register for the alerts. I mean, Yountville has a lot of registrations already, but it's always important to get more registrations if we can. CAL FIRE came to our 2nd and 3rd event, so the 19th and the 24th. They did a fire extinguisher training with people. Also a smaller crowd, but it was really interesting. It was very fun. There was quite a few people on October 19th, even though it was very hot. But still, people came out, they did the training, they got some good information out. And same thing on the 24th. It seemed like every time they did stuff, like, people just learned new things. I did learn new things. And then Sergeant Mike Malott, he's not here right now, but he was there just to support. He was great. He answered questions when they were asked. It was just nice having fire and sheriff and OES there as support. Sorry. Any questions so far? I feel like I just said a lot. No? Okay.
No questions.
Okay. So since the event, we did send out a brief survey to everyone who basically registered or attended. So even if you didn't attend the event, I also sent it out because I was curious. Why didn't people attend the event? I was just curious to see if anyone answered. At least one person who did not attend answered. So that was interesting. Some interesting facts from the survey from the respondents. We did get quite a few back. When it came to the question of how did you hear about the event, 66% said they heard it from the press release. How informative was the workshops? 66% said it was very informative. And have you shared the information with your friends or family? 83% said they had. And would you attend would you attend additional workshops if offered? 100% said yes.
Excellent.
So there is, which kind of reflects what I got, especially after the Red Cross event. I had a lot of people come to me and ask like for CPR training and like first aid training, which leads me to the next part. We did meet with some of our partners after in our emergency committee on November 14th. We did share this information with our partners who were there, and we also talked about possible future events. It seemed like the partners had a good experience. They had a good experience with us. They said that we were a very communicative town. Like, we responded quickly, and we wanted them to come back, and they seemed to want to come back. We also met with Brianna from the OES, from Napa OES. Hillary and I did, basically talking about the county's emergency plan, and apparently they're working on it right now. They'll probably have it done early next year. And we also got a virtual training on Zone Haven, which was very interesting, and possibly do more in the future. So next steps, next things we're doing. So we are planning, or the committee is planning to meet in January, but I've already reached out to our current partners, including there was a suggestion to reach out to CERT. That conversation is starting to possibly do something next year. Of course, we're looking into CPR training at one of these events, if not more. And there was an idea of doing a national night out in August, possibly. Again, that's something that we still need to discuss, look further into. And of course, our swag and prizes were very popular. People seemed to really enjoy them since we did a raffle. If you came, give you a raffle ticket, and you could win like a full size 3-day, 2-person like emergency backpack. It was very nice. But we're looking to further different ones. Councilmember Reeves suggested the tool thing, which looks pretty cool, like how to turn off your gas and water in an emergency tool. So we're trying to come up with like new ideas, new swag ideas, just to keep people interested, keep the conversation going. So basically, I'm going to repeat our slogans because we gotta make this thing. Together we are better is the idea of all of this emergency preparedness. We're trying to bring more workshops, more resources for the community to learn about what they can do in an emergency, at least in the beginning of emergency. So, any questions, thoughts, comments, feedback?
I talked to PG&E during the 2014 earthquake, and they said, do not turn off your gas. So just double check with PG&E. I have one of those little tools with the hex thing on the top, and it's more about, if you turn it off, turning it back on, and you're not allowed to turn it back on. So something like that, but I may not have it correct.
No, it's good to know. The more we know, the better, I think.
It's like old school. They always told you to do this, but now things change or something. So.
And I just want to point out the pictures that are up. They're from all 3 events. I try to get the best overview about everyone's participation, including the goats from Firewise, who are very adorable and were just named and very popular.
Having attended the event last year for 2022, it was really well done, but a major operation to take over both the courtyard and as well as inside. So I can't compare and talk to the numbers for both, but it seemed like breaking these down, we got more information because it was different than just going to a booth, like to going to the co-ed booth. They actually had really solid presentations. And so attendees at these events, as I think you guys all attended, really went away with a lot of actionable items. So well done.
That's the feeling I got compared to last year. There were definitely, and Hillary, feel free to chime in on this if you like. There was definitely a feeling last year of like, well, we're all here. We got some information, but can we get more, like more focus, more practical guidelines, information? Who do we contact, right? I mean, they were there, but people just didn't know how to ask the right questions, maybe, or maybe they were shy, or just
yeah.
And we had about 50 registrations over all 3 events, and about 30 attendees altogether. So. Some people, there's a lot of people who registered and didn't show up, and there's a lot of people who just showed up.
Yeah.
Which is
I noticed that.
Totally fine.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yeah, I attended all 3 events, and I really, really got a lot out of them. But one of the things that I felt was that it's a great start, and that it needs to be ongoing, which is what you're talking about, and also that maybe the pinpoint, especially for COAD, would be walking people through how to start their own neighborhood group. I started my group, and I took all 3 workshops back to that group, but it's a little hard trying to make it up as you go along. It'd be great to have a little bit more of a template to do to talk about, okay, there are issues about privacy in a group. If you're going to share information, how is that shared? How do you take it back? How do you, all of those things that COAD's probably got all the information about. But in a big group like that, you don't share that kind of granular information, and it feels like that we could get down to that, and especially if we decide to do that national night out, where that's an opportunity to really start some groups, then having that preparation first would be really, really great.
PM, I'll just step in really quickly. During our standing committee meeting, COAD was present, and we discussed having the Meet My Neighbor Phase 1, Part 1, and then they're working on compartmentalizing everything you're talking about into a Part 2. So that you have the introduction to it, and then have the opportunity to go back into your neighborhood cohorts of sorts and develop the program further with their aid.
Right. That would be so great.
Vice Mayor Knight.
I just wanted to thank Beatrice and Hillary for organizing, for being a big part of just organizing this, and then also the fact that we had our first responders, the firefighters, and Sergeant Malott there. It was great. So it was really a great program. And also wanted to thank Councilmember for organizing and being a big part of organizing the event. But what I heard from everyone is that the public, having the events and getting this information out was really a great start. I mean, I think the COAD, what I took out of it, I mean, really from the first event was we had a speaker there that talked about Meet Your Neighbor that had originally started as Map Your Neighborhood, but now in Napa County they've developed it as Meet Your Neighbor. That I think that's just really a good starting point for us to try to engage the residents. And I know there was one person at that meeting that said these workshops where we receive information is good, but can we plan events where it's more interactive? And so I think where anything that we can do to get people more engaged. But I was just thinking as you were talking about your presentation now, maybe it's also an opportunity for us when we have events throughout the town, throughout the year, whether it's music in the park or our movie nights and all that, is to maybe try to incorporate this so that people that may not typically be able to come out would have an opportunity to receive information when they're just mingling at like music in the park or the movie night or something. So it's a big add on for you for planning, but if we're looking at how do we reach more people, there might be, it's something where I think to consider as you're thinking about future planning. And I like the idea of that National Night Out, or that we're getting together as a community and planning and talking about emergency preparedness. Thank you.
Councilmember Tripp.
I just wanted to thank Hillary B. and the two council members. It was a big production. I only went to two, but they were really excellent. And it was a lot of work, so thank you very much. I also really support the night out because I'm having a little trouble visualizing how to launch with my neighbors. And if there was a focal point, like whatever you call it, in August, that would give me a reason to kind of bug my neighbors and get something going. And also the CPR training, if we could arrange that. Again, I don't know how big a deal that is, but through the Red Cross, that really resonated with me. That would be a really good thing. So, but thank you. It was really well done.
Yeah, the CPR training did come up during the meeting. Red Cross does a training. The firefighters also do a training. It's just different levels. CERT also does training. So that's one part of the discussion is like, when do we do what? Like if we do something for CERT does have a 90-minute workshop. It also has like a 3-day training. So like what level do you want to do? So that's part of it. We're still discussing, especially National Night Out. It's an idea. We're just starting to talk about it. So details, yes. Or it's in the works.
I just wanted to put in my 2 cents that I think that's a great idea, but it was really well done.
But yeah, it is hard to get. How do you get the most people, or how to get the information to the most people in a practical way? Because there are limitations to a small, or to resources, Yeah.
Thank you, though. It was great programming.
Yeah, it was definitely. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the idea of going to other events that are not specific to emergency preparedness would be great if you tabled and maybe had one preparedness tip for the day or something like that, but also have little handouts of the schedule of upcoming events that are specific to the emergency preparedness so that people could plan it on their calendar, because there's a lot of people here who have really busy calendars, and it just seems like a lot of the people that I talked to said, oh, I'm so sorry I missed that, because they wanted to come, but it was just maybe not in enough time for them to have planned to come. So always, even if you have to change the calendar later, having it in their mind would be great.
Or there's the Parks and Rec calendar that comes out,
Yeah.
a few
Yeah.
times a year, so
Mhm.
something to consider.
Yeah.
Councilmember McKee Camp.
I think the marketing that was done was really strong, and using Jason in the videos. I mean, you would hope. I mean, you guys put such professional effort into that, and I was hoping that that would have some longer legs to help us get on calendars. I had asked with Music in the Park that the host make those announcements and not just talk about what's going on that day, but to make announcements, and that would be for movie nights too. I think that whenever we have a group of people assembled, those announcements are good. I'd like to, as I know, I want to start earlier in the year, especially when there's sessions pertaining to fire awareness and yard cleaning and clearing. I think before we get in the fire season, that's when we should have that big push. And said a little earlier that I'd love to add evacuation with pets. I know my experience was when we were evacuated in the 2017 fire, we forgot the cat litter box. You just need a checklist for your pets too, and we have a lot of seniors here with pets, and in that moment of adrenaline and you forget. So I think that could help. But yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure working with the both of you and with the team, and thanks for adding on the fire extinguisher trainings. I'm still mad that some of the people that directly said to me, "Oh, we haven't seen our fire extinguisher in years or since we moved in." They didn't show. So you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But I did have one neighbor walking by after one of the sessions down the street with a youth. I don't know who it was, but she was like, "Oh yeah." And then when you have the extinguisher, it's sweep. And she was going through the things that she learned at the session, and she was, so it was good to hear her enthusiasm that she knew how to do it, and she wanted to make sure her little pal knew that too.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to our
Okay, everybody.
last item, council external meeting reports.
Just real quick, Mayor, before we have two quick presentations from John and Sam.
Oh,
Just
okay.
quick updates, yeah.
All right, please. Administrative staff reports. We'll make an executive decision on the changing the agenda.
Oh, okay. Hi. Just really quickly, I just wanted to announce a few things we have coming up. So on Thursday, December 7th is our youth art show opening from 5:30 to 7. It is one of my favorite events of the year, and Brad asked me why. But it's also, the kids are just so thrilled to have their art featured, and the show is up now, so if you're not able to make it, you can always stroll through. But it's a terrific evening with the kids, so proud of their art. We also have another day of Santa visits on Saturday from 10 to 1. And then from 2 to 4, we have Santa visits with pets. And that's benefiting, donations benefiting Jameson Animal Rescue. So we're partnering with them. And that'll be at the Community Center Plaza. And then on Tuesday, the 12th, we have Senior Bingo at 2 p.m., always a crowd favorite at the Community Center. The 13th is our shopping trip to Walnut Creek, and the 18th culminates our season of festivity with the Holiday Light Viewing Tour, bus tour. And then we finish the year with our winter camp when the kids get out of school. So, thank you.
When is the camp?
Winter camp is 3 weeks. It starts December 18th and ends January 5th.
Great. Thanks for doing that.
From the Public Works side of things, I would like to report that I was monitoring the City of Napa's City Council meeting while your meeting was occurring, and they did approve our water sampling JPA on their consent calendar, so that's hot off the presses. And then also on the calendar, this Saturday, December 9th, at 10 a.m., Public Works is hosting a public meeting in the front yard here of Town Hall to get input on the landscape project, and we're inviting everybody to attend.
Thank you very much. Any additional staff reports? Okay, I will move on to item 13, council external meeting reports. LAFCO met yesterday, and we had a pretty big agenda, but I just want to report on one public hearing that we had, and this has to do with Napa Unified School District. There were certainly lots of Dr. Musetti and many other of the executive staff were there. So I think everybody probably remembers it was north of Trancas. They had an experimental teaching farm. They sold that property a while ago, and the city of Napa did rezone it, and that is going to be affordable housing. In the meantime, they were looking for additional property, which they found near Vintage High. So and this took us quite a bit of time to get all the documents put together, but with that, with this new property, the majority of it is within the jurisdiction of the city of Napa, but some bit of it is outside in the rural-urban limit line. So we had to do 4 actions, and so one was to adopt a resolution to move their property into the sphere of influence for the city of Napa, because it wasn't before. And then we also had to make an approval to move the property into sphere of influence for Napa Sanitation District. Then we had to sequentially approve the annexation to the Napa Sanitation District, and then also approve an outside service agreement with the city of Napa to provide water. So Napa Sanitation does the sewer. It happens to be a sewer line that runs right along the property, and so this way then the formal annexations will happen after our sphere of influences were approved. That's the next step, but we have approved water and wastewater going to that site. So it's about a 12.8 acre site, and as part of the agreement, they also set aside 2.5 acres for affordable housing in exchange for the city of Napa giving them water. So just to see what, some other municipalities are doing with different properties that are coming up. So that's received all of our approvals, and it'll probably be in January before we do the rest of the annexations, but that's moving forward. So,
Mayor, is that off of Garfield Lane? Is that the access?
It is, hold on a second, and I will tell you that it is, it will be right near Vintage High. And I don't have a street address. I did have tons of maps that I didn't bring, but
Okay.
if it's, you think it might be Garfield, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Of reasons.
So, anyway, that's the only report I have. I don't see lights on for anything else, so.
I have just Climate Action Committee.
Okay.
The county received 2 bids for a climate action plan, and the committee agreed with the staff recommendation, and that recommendation was passed on to the Board of Supervisors to authorize a climate action plan. Of course, it was more money than expected, so we, as a jurisdiction, will be receiving some sort of bill if the county decides to go ahead with it. And I guess they will first ask us and then go ahead with it.
What was the amount?
It was like
It's like $10,000
oh, total
for the town of Yountville, a little under
town
that.
of Yountville, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was 560 something.
Right, close to 600,000, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there was another action where the committee forwarded a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors again to support the project with Lawrence Livermore Lab in placing structures that will hold analyzing equipment for greenhouse gas emission recordings. So it will be a kind of worldwide first project that happens in Napa Valley. So we'll see what happens with the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. Not seeing anything else. Can we get a motion and a second to adjourn to our next meeting on Tuesday, January the 16th at 3 p.m.?
Move to adjourn.
And all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody.
Merry Christmas.